So a theological account of history is not really about investigating what happened. It's about interpreting history after the fact. You know, that we as Christians, we affirm that God has caught everyone up in every aspect of reality through the death and resurrection of Jesus, and that God is involved in every aspect of history. So we don't really make a distinction between history God's involved in, natural, and history that God's not involved in, supernatural. We say God's involved in all of it. But this is a retrospective claim. This is a claim that we make right now based on our own Christian presuppositions, and we can look back and narrate through history to figure out how God was involved, and we can ask theological questions about it. And I just don't know why that's not enough for when we're talking about the resurrection. Like, why can't we talk theologically about what Paul says happened, and let the resurrection itself not be something that we need to be able to reconstruct the way we can reconstruct the siege at Jerusalem, for instance?
Yeah, well, I just think this is a wonderful, beautiful example of the difference between a historian and a theologian.
Okay.
Because I'm approaching this historically, whereas I think you're looking at it more theologically. So let's talk about a couple of these things. You mentioned about it. We have to, as Christians, we interpret this, and God is acting in history here. I agree with you if we're looking at it practically speaking and theologically speaking. But as a historian, I can bifurcate the historical from the theological. So, for example, take the claim, Jesus died for our sins. Now, I can't affirm that entire statement as a historian. I can take that by faith, but I can adjudicate on half of that statement. I can adjudicate on the portion that says Jesus died, or Jesus died by crucifixion. I can look at the historical data and conclude that Jesus died by crucifixion, while saying the claim that Jesus' death atones for sins, well, that's for the theologian. That's for faith, where faith comes in. But I can't verify that. I might be able to verify that Jesus believed his death atones for sins, or that the early Christians believed that Jesus' death atones for sin. But as a historian, I don't have the tools to be able to verify that Jesus' death indeed atones for our sins. Regarding methodological naturalism, I agree, but I think that methodological naturalism, we've got to take a little more prudent approach to it that's less infused with worldviews than is typically done. What most historians, or I should say biblical scholars, well, even some historians who deal with this, and the matter of historians and miracles is something that is a live discussion even amongst philosophers of history at this very time, and has been for the last 2 decades, a living discussion. But a lot of philosophers of history, biblical scholars will say that you got to go with a methodological naturalism that if miracles involved, you can't adjudicate on it. Okay, so I think what a historian can do is they can look at the data and adjudicate on whether the event occurred. They just wouldn't be able, as a historian, to be able to adjudicate on the cause of the event. So let me give an example. Let's suppose that astrophysicists have been keeping track of a comet for a decade, and within the last year, they've determined that the comet is on a crash course with our moon. And they've determined that it is going to crash into the lunar surface at a specific time on a specific day. And at that time, the Hubble Space Telescope and a bunch of planetariums around the world are zoomed in on the lunar surface, and they watch that comet slam into the moon. And as the dust settles, there's a message on the moon's surface that says, and it's in Hebrew and in Greek, it says, Jesus is Lord. Now, an astrophysicist could look at that, a cosmologist, and say, I have no idea how that happened, how that statement appeared in Greek and Hebrew on the moon's surface. But you wouldn't turn around and deny that the comet crashed into the moon's surface and left that message. You would say the event occurred, you would leave the cause undetermined, because you don't have the tools as an astrophysicist to determine that God caused it. Now, of course, you could take your lab coat off as a physicist and say, but I do think that God is probably the best explanation. But in doing so, you're not using the tools of a physicist. In a similar way, I think the historian can look at the evidence for the resurrection of Jesus and conclude that Jesus rose from the dead and leave the cause undetermined. Now, I think you could take your tweed jacket off as a historian and say, well, yeah, God's probably the best cause for it, especially given some of Jesus' claims, but we can't have the tools as a historian to verify that God did it.